Okay, welcome. And here we are for Lynn Power's Tai Chi session with me, Philip Sheridan, founder of Discover Tai Chi. It's good to have you guys with us live. And for people who are watching again later on the recording, welcome to you as well. I'm going to get started without any further ado. So I'm going to push my seat back. We're on a journey, aren't we, through the Shibashi set, which means 18 movements. And I'm going to start from the beginning. We're going to move relatively quickly through the opening movements, and then we'll spend some more time on some of the other movements towards the back end so that we get some time to practice those. So with me, we start off with Qi Shi, and a discussion we had in my community class today was that this movement very much sets the scene. So it's one maybe to spend a little bit of time on. It's very much about seeing if you can kind of turn the volume down in your head to get rid of the mental chatter. Not get rid, but at least turn the volume down. And kind of just induce a sense of, this is my time and I'm here to focus maybe on listening a little bit to my physical as well as emotional state. Taking a breath or two, maybe, just to settle in. I'm going to do this one more time. And then we begin to open that movement out. Very simply at first. If you think of the movement slowly building in their range and scope, and even in their intensity from these initial movements, which ought to be relatively easygoing. Once again, we'll do this one more time. Here we go. I'm going to let Helen in. Keep going, guys. Excuse me to those folks on the recording. There we go. So we're taking the hands overhead and we're tilting to one side. Try to look in the direction in which you tilt. And then the opposite side. And I think most of you know the rules, which is just work comfortably, easily, within a range of motion that suits you. There's no prizes for trying to push a movement that just doesn't feel right or upsets your balance. And we talk about balance in Tai Chi not just from that physical perspective. It's very much a whole state kind of concept. If we were thinking about it from a kind of more medical way of thinking, we'd use the biopsychosocial model, which is more of a holistic way of thinking about the human being as in context and impacted by other things external to it: work, life, family, friends, all those things. So Tai Chi encompasses all of those things. Here's our next movement, called the fountain, but it's also sometimes called happy days, which I like. And it's also called parting clouds in Shibashi. Again, just moving nice and easy. These first sort of 5 movements are really good icebreakers, so to speak. They kind of get you in the spirit of things without demanding too much. Again, if you just move gently with some awareness, we might say that we're being kind to ourselves as well. Let's do one more, shall we? And then we'll move on to the 5th movement, called rolling arms. It brings some rotation in, and I'm turning to the right. My hands and palms are lifted, and then I'm just pushing the backhand, the right hand in this case, forward, and then turning to the left. And now I push the left hand forward. And I'm alternating hands. At each extreme, we end up with the hands fully extended with the arms, and then we push the corresponding hand forward. Tai Chi really means exactly that we move from one extreme to another, which you may have heard in terms of yin and yang. But it really does mean that we move from maybe an open expression of a body to a closed expression of a body, and then immediately return to the opposite. Lovely. So yin yang describes up and down, forwards and back, left and right, hot and cold. You get the idea, this sense of opposition, but that is complementary, harmonious, sometimes at odds, but always present. Let's do our next movement called rowing the boat, where we're circling the hands forwards and around. Start small. And as you get used to that rotation, again, pay attention to your shoulders. Only move within a range that suits you and feels comfortable. But you can begin to make those circles bigger. The hands come down. I always think of this like the butterfly swimming stroke. I'm going to stand up, keep going, because there should come a point when you're really tall at the top of that circle. We'll do one more. Excellent. And here we move into more rotation of the trunk and the body. This movement is called casting your cares away. Very simply, I'm going to start with my left hand if you want to work with me. So this is my left hand, and I'm casting my cares away to the right. And then I bring that hand down, and now the right hand casts off to the left, like throwing a ball. Sometimes it's called throw the ball. Helen, my partner, likes to think of it as splashing water to each side, which is quite a nice way of thinking about it. So you've got some different ways to embody this movement with a sensibility. So we're just moving easily. There's rotation through the spine and a little bit of a stretch through the shoulder. Again, not too much, hopefully. Let's do one more. Okay. Whether we're seated or standing, next movement is called gazing at the moon. We've had, certainly here in Yorkshire, a rather spectacular full moon a few days ago when it was clear skies and bitterly cold, so very apt movement. We imagine the moon is above us and behind us. And in order to look at it, we have to turn. I'm lifting the hands to help with the turn. And then I drop the hands and sweep and look to the left to see if I can look to the moon over my shoulder. Again, work within a range that suits you. You may not get such a big turn as me. It may in fact be more towards the left and right. That's okay. If you're seated, you will probably find that all the turning happens above the waist. And if you're standing up with me, then you've got the hips and the pelvis to turn as well. Although you have to be mindful of your balance, particularly with a prosthetic limb. Here we go again to the right and once more to the left, at least for me. Don't worry if we're out of sync. And we're down. Okay. Next movement called pushing palms. Deceptively challenging in some circumstances. I'm holding my hands out. Can you see? It's as if I'm about to juggle, or we sometimes call this two soups. And but I want you to tip the right hand and push it across to the left. It's crossing my body to the left. Draw it back and then tip the left hand and push it across. If I turn, you can see that it's going across my body to the right. So I'm creating this kind of shape just to show you with my hands alternately crossing. So we get a stretch in the shoulder, we get a turn through the waist, through the hips again if we're standing. And if we look with our head in the direction of the push, then we're turning the head as well. So there's a lot of rotation going on here in this movement. The thing is, the brain is a little bit unfamiliar with the idea of a hand crossing the midline. Can get a little confused. So don't worry if you're a little bit challenged with this movement at first. It's okay. So just push, draw the hand back and then push. It's quite a strong push as well. Have the sense that there's a little bit of gentle resistance for you to work against. Okay, I'm going to do one more with each hand. There we go. So gentle resistance is a familiar concept or idea in Tai Chi and Qigong. Another way of thinking about it, and an often used description of Tai Chi, is that it's a bit like swimming in air, but we still have this notion that there's some form of resistance against which we work. It's not quite as explicit as swimming because we can really feel the water, but we want to engender that same idea. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. Next movement, number 10 in our Shibashi sequence, is wave hands in clouds. I'm first of all starting with an embrace, okay? If I again turn to the side, you can see that I really do have space with which to have this an imaginary embrace. My top hand, wiggling my fingers, is between an imaginary set of shoulder blades, and this lower hand is in the small of the back of my particular person or partner. And I'm just sweeping. This is my right hand on top, so I'm sweeping them to the right, and then I'm exchanging hands and then sweeping them to the left. And I'm simply exchanging hands at each side, and then for the sweep, nothing happens apart from a turn of the hips and shoulders. So all of that exchange of hands happens at either side of the movement. Sometimes people kind of meld it together into one thing and it can get a little bit confusing. Whereas if you keep it clear that the hands swap at either side, hopefully it's a little easier to manage. If you're standing up with me, or even if you sat down, see if you can have a little bit of weight shift as well from one leg to the other. So not only are we rotating, but we're shifting weight. One side and then the other side. If you sat down, I often encourage people who use wheelchairs, for instance, when I work with people in wheelchairs, if possible, to get some shift of weight from one hip to the other, if that's possible. So we'll just spend a little longer with this one. So we'll go once more to whichever side you're on, again, not worrying if we're in sync. And then we come back to the center. Weight equalizes, and then we can let the hands fall away. So there you go, 10 movements of Shibashi. That might be enough. You may want to just stick with that, maybe as a little routine for yourself on a day-to-day basis, and you can just review the recording of this session or previous sessions and use it in that way. Before we move on, it's useful, again, seated or standing, to have a bit of a wider base, hands on hips if possible, and just practice this weight shift from one side to the other. It's such an indicative part of Tai Chi and Qigong that oftentimes in a community class we'll simply start with this very simple shift of weight from one leg to the other. Both feet are flat on the ground. I know you can't see them. Let me walk back a bit. There we go. I'm just shifting weight. It's sometimes we use the analogy that we're on a bus or train and we've got no seats to sit in, and therefore we're standing up and we have to move with that bus and train in order to maintain our balance, which gets us used to the idea of that balance is dynamic, that it's a movable thing. Okay? So that can be just a useful way of trying to get some weight shift. And that's really difficult. I've got a lower limb prosthesis. If you have as well, that's quite a challenging movement in itself. We can end up quite constrained in day-to-day movements because we're trying to squarely keep our weight between our feet, and we don't necessarily explore the bounds of shifting weight, and it can be quite a challenge to do so. In Tai Chi, I'm kind of asking you to explore those boundaries, and that's something that we'll do more of as we move on through these sessions. Okay, let's pick up our Shibashi movements. So, next movement, a bit more challenging now, more weight shift, only this time I'm taking a pace forward diagonally with my right foot. This is my right foot. This movement's called Becoming One with the Sea and Sky. Quite a challenge. I'm drifting forward. Again, if you've got a transfemoral amputation and you use a knee unit in your prosthetic limb, this can be very challenging to bear weight. So again, I'm asking you to just be mindful of that. So it's as if we scoop our hands into the sea and then we rock back and cast it up into the air in a rather grand gesture. Try to have almost an image in mind of being at the seaside somewhere. It doesn't have to be in the UK, it could be somewhere nice and warm, which would be quite nice at this point where it's been snowing all day here where I live. So we've just got to be mindful of this movement because it's rather big and grand. Make that the last one. If you sat down, and again, I'll do this now for my left side. Again, if you're still standing, that's okay. I'm shifting. This is my left leg and I'm pushing it forwards. Gives me some support to work into, if at all possible. So again, I'm just hinging at the hips and opening up as I go backwards. There's a bit of a to and fro of the body as well. Just breathe comfortably. At no point are we thinking about the breath in any way apart from it just being relaxed and natural and just breathing easily with the movement. One more. Okay. So the second movement in this little subsection again involves this weight shift from one side to the other. I'll continue seated, right leg pushes forward. Again, if we're sat down, if you're standing up, see if you can take a pace diagonally, give yourself a wide base of support. And we're placing our hands, again, if I was at the seaside and actually in the sea, waist kind of deep, I'd be able to put my hands in and push them forwards, create a wave, pick them clear, bring them back, and then push a second wave out. And that's it. There's a lilty ebb and flow to this movement as we push successive waves out that travel out into the horizon. Really like this one. Again, try to be relaxed in the back and the torso. Try not to hold it too rigid. Don't go too floppy either. Again, we're trying to find a balance between being secure, but also at ease as well. Make this the last one on this side. I'm going to stand up to illustrate this movement from a standing position. Left leg on this side. Just adjust this mic. So left leg, and I'm pushing. I start off gradually because my balance is challenged on this side. Strangely, because it's my right leg, which is the prosthetic side. So it's harder for me to balance as I bring my weight backwards rather than forwards. That might be different for you, but it's worth taking notice. So I move a little bit easier in this left side than I do on the right side, simply because I'm more mindful of my balance. One more push. Excellent. Okay, final movement that uses this ebb and flow is called White Dove Spreads Its Wings. Just going to have to move a little bit this way so I don't bash my plant. And I've, once again, getting my right leg forward. Again, same idea if you sat down. I'm spreading my imaginary wings. Make sure the hands are kind of low rather than high. That just makes life a little bit harder if you have them high. And then once again, there's a bit of a push forward, close your wings, and then rock back and open your wings, and then push forward, rocking back. Again, you've got to be mindful of your balance, particularly for lower limb amputations, but for upper limb as well. We're just moving to and fro. Ooh, there you go. Had a bit of a wobble, but I'm okay. I'm going to come back. Discretion is the better part of valor. Left side for me, standing up. Same thing, opening my arms wide, but keeping my hands kind of just below shoulder height. Closing my imaginary wings, opening them, and just going to and fro. Okay. Finish there. So those three movements are quite challenging movements. What's useful now is that we get a bit of a reprieve with a simpler movement. I'm going to come a bit closer to the camera so you can see. So we create very loose fists as if you're holding something softly in each hand, tucked in. And I'm simply extending one hand out, turning it over, and then drawing it back. It's called punching. don't really think of it as punching so much. It's an extension and a turn of a hand. And if you wish, you can roll the shoulders so that you get a really long extension and a nice kind of stretch through the shoulder. Or if you wish, you can be very kind of square on and just have very short, kind of constrained extensions, if that suits you. Again, I don't want to be too prescriptive here. So if you want to roll, like I'm doing, to get a very long extension of a hand and arm, feel free to do so. And if you prefer to keep things more constrained or contained, then shorten that range. So that gives us a bit of a reprieve from those previous 3 movements. And then we're back into a slightly bigger movement. It's called wild goose or wild geese take flight. We start in this position like so. Hands are just down. We think of our hands as wings, or our whole arms, in fact, want to have very soft, pliant hands and arms. And I'm simply making imaginary, wing beats with very soft hands. A really good way to get a feel for this movement is to kind of really tune into the temperature differential of the skin of the palms and the backs of the hands as they move through the air, and you'll be able to discern a slight coolness of the surface that's moving through the air. So it's the palm surface moving down that cools, and then the back of the hand on the upstroke or the wing beat, like so. If at all possible, try to lengthen up through the body and then drop a little bit into the legs, if at all possible. So there's a sense of a growth from the feet upwards and then some dropping into the stance. Again, that will be relative to you and your condition. If I'm sat down, if you guys keep going, again, same thing. I'm just extending like so. And again, I'm going to have this sense of elongation through the posture on the upward part of the wing beat, and then a sense of relaxation on the down. It's almost as if I get pulled upright a little bit with each wing beat before relaxing a little bit. Fab. Wonderful. Okay. Are we okay for another minute or two? Okay, we'll keep going. So, next movement. It's called the spinning wheel, or sometimes it's called the wheel of life. It's a really big movement in classical shibashi, but it could be a big, big challenge for some of us. So I'm going to show you, first of all, a bit of an alternative. Let's imagine that we take a ball, beach ball, and I pick it up overhead. And then I'm going to turn to my right, and then I'm simply dropping that ball down, sweeping it round and picking it up on the left side overhead, turning my trunk, and then round again. Get the idea? So whether you're seated or standing, I'm hoping that you can at least get that first initial movement going, and then go back the way you came. So hands go around and up. So it's a big movement. If you're standing up with me, the hips are turning as well. So I'm facing the left at this point, and then I'm turning the hips, And now I'm facing the right side. Again, if you guys keep going and I sit back down on my box, a bit more difficult. Most of the movement comes from the waist. So I'm not going to be able to move within as large a range as I might do if I was standing up, but we can still get that circle going. Okay, so that's an initial way of getting into that movement called the wheel of life. If you may feel confident enough, seated or standing, you can actually, and you may have had an impression of this, again, if I do standing up, you could move the whole trunk with this movement. So if I start and go to the right and I actually hinge at the hips and get my trunk involved as well. But that really is disruptive to your balance. Again, whether we're seated or standing. So again, you've got to be mindful of that as you move into this, that you feel comfortable and confident to do so. Okay, I'm going to head back the opposite direction. Eventually, for some people, you might be able to really sweep the head down and around and up, but that's a really challenging movement. And we'll stop there. So a really big movement, really disruptive and challenging to our balance, seated or standing. So it's one that bears a gradual kind of working your way into and being mindful again that you're not pushing yourself to an extreme such that you feel really wobbly, really unbalanced, or if like me, you're a bit prone to vertigo when you start moving your head around, but you're not inducing, excessive dizziness or anything like that. Okay, 2 movements to go, and then we've completed all 18 movements. This penultimate movement is called bounce the ball. Let's start off with right hand just doing an imaginary bounce of a ball, like so. And then left hand bounce. And just get that idea that maybe you might have done this with a ball at some point, maybe a basketball. I've almost got 2 basketballs bouncing each one alternately, like so. Okay, so that's simple enough, I hope. Wouldn't be quite that simple from a Qigong perspective if we didn't challenge our balance a little bit. Again, I'll do this seated in a moment. So it could be that this just involves a shift of weight from one side to another for some of you. But basically, here's my right hand. If I'm bouncing the ball with my right hand, I'm shifting my weight. I might just lift my heel and bounce the ball. There's my left leg. And then as I bounce the ball on the left side, I'm shifting my weight, and I might even feel confident enough to bounce the ball and lift the right leg. Get the idea? So again, I want you to be mindful that you work within the scope of your balance, that it's perfectly okay, that it could just be a shift of weight from one side to the other. So that might be what's happening if you're seated. Yeah? Or it might be that you're able to just lift one side and bounce the ball, and maybe just lift a heel on the other. Or you may, as I say, just be shifting weight, bouncing that ball. If I transition to seated, same things apply. If I push back, hopefully you can see my feet, I'm bouncing the ball, and I might just be shifting weight onto that side. Or I might be strong enough to lift the leg clear, lifted my right leg, bouncing with the left hand, putting them down. And then on the other side, lifting an alternate leg, which, to be honest, I think is harder seated than it is standing in some respects. You really have to use those muscles of the trunk and the torso to stabilize yourself. Get the idea? Called bouncing a ball. Really challenging, but it brings us to our final movement in the set. And I'm going to stand back up for this one, which means that we've completed all the movements in Shibashi. And our final closing movement just kind of brings things to a close nicely. I'm just bringing my hands towards me, letting them settle down, and then pushing forward, lifting and drawing in. And again, it's just a movement that just embodies a sense of gathering, a sense of closing, and a sense of just signaling that everything is coming to a close or coming to a rest after all of that movement. Wonderful. 18 movements. That's exactly what Shibashi means, 18. And it's a really useful set. It's symmetrical. So unlike some traditional long Tai Chi forms that aren't symmetrical and take you on a long convoluted journey, this keeps things in place. You don't need much space. Whatever you do on one side, you end up doing on the other. So again, you get this nice balanced set of movements. And you've got a range of movements, some of which are really challenging and some of which are, kind of nice and relaxing. So I kind of like it. I hope you do too. We'll continue practicing them, but we're going to be introducing some other concepts as we move forward over the next sessions. Some of them may be familiar to you if you've attended previous sessions over years with me. But I'm going to stop the recording. You guys can unmute yourselves if you like. And if you want to let me know how you got on with all 18 movements, please do. I know some of you may need to get straight off, but that's okay. Give me a wave if necessary. Let me unpin myself.